welcome. My name is Thiago Schiefer. I'm an audio designer at Yellowbrick Games, and I'm here today to talk to you about the sound for our game, Eternal Strands. I'm going to share with you some of our design principles, key learnings, and challenges we faced while developing this game. And what I will cover today is, first of all, a little bit of context, who we are, and what is Eternal Strands. Then we're going to dive into a few case studies, how we supported combat design, how we handled destruction and thermodynamics, and finally, a few techniques we used to mix the game. Then at the end, we'll have a brief Q&A. So what is Eternal Strands? I'll let our creative director, Mike Laidlaw, give you an overview.
Hello, and welcome to the world of Eternal Strands, a new fantasy action-adventure game where the world around you is your weapon. You embark on your journey as a young, magic-wielding weaver named Bryn. She seeks to unravel the secrets of the Enclave, a once thriving center of magic, now left in ruins. In the Enclave, you can climb and interact with nearly everything you see. The mantle, the magical cloak on your back, grants you control over frost, flame, and kinetic magic. Combine these elements in creative ways to manipulate the environment to your advantage and defeat your foes. No two battles are the same, as extreme weather alters the battlefield in this true physics playground. Take up the mantle in Eternal Strands.
Thank you, Mike. So Eternal Strands was developed by Yellowbrick Games, which is a studio founded in 2020 during the pandemic. Our head offices are in Quebec City, and we were around 65 people by the time we shipped this game. Most of us are industry veterans. The audio team itself is comprised of 4 expats. We all moved from one country to another, looking for either more sun or less sun, like me, but always wanting to work on cool games. Very quick, and these are some of the titles we have contributed to before joining Yellowbrick Games. Just a little bit about myself. I started out as a guitar player in Brazil. Once I finally realized I could work with video games there, I started doing game jams and indie game projects until I joined a company called Taps Games that did mobile games. I worked on 1 to 2 games per week on a variety of different roles. And then I moved to Canada, and in 2020 I joined Ubisoft to be an audio QC on Far Cry 6. I also did some dialogue editing there for Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora until 2022, when I joined Yellowbrick Games to work on Eternal Strands, which you're hearing about today. So Eternal Strands was developed with Unreal Engine 5. We are, of course, Wwise people. We shipped with Wwise 2022.1.12, and we used Artisy to drive our narrative design, and we built a pipeline between Unreal, Wwise, and Artisy to associate VO assets with narrative lines. Okay, so let's start getting into the audio side of things. At the core of the development, we had 4 main pillars that guided us. Cause and effect, so we have a fully fledged physics system, including thermodynamics in the game, and the audio is there to support every physics interaction you can do it in the game. Foreshadowing, you can hear things before you actually see them, which is particularly important to drive players towards the encounters with our gigantic enemies. Heroism, the player has access to awesome weapons and magic powers, and the audio is there to provide support to the feeling of progression and growth. And finally, contrast, the juxtaposition between your battles with towering creatures and then going back to your base camp and having conversations with your Weaver band, and the audio is there to support that as well. And that leads us into our first case study, which is supporting combat design. And we had a lot to do. So just for combat, we had to provide sounds for 10 minions, each of which had 3 to 7 abilities, 9 epic creatures plus 1 on our DLC. Each of those had 5 to 10 abilities. The player herself, Bryn, has access to 9 magic powers plus 1 of the DLC. Each of those has 3 progression levels. She also has access to 3 weapon types, sword and shield, bow and arrow, and two-hander. For each of those, you can have 1 variation for each of the strengths we have in the game: fire, ice, and telekinesis. And for each of those permutations, 3 progression levels. And of course, all of that had to be synced with VFX and animation, and had to be light on performance. So, and we also, of course, designed the sounds for ambiances and VO and breakables, etc. And we were only 4 guys to do everything. So one of our best strategies to organize and implement all of that while keeping our sanity was gameplay cues. So these were one of our main tools behind the scalability in our project. So a very quick primer on gameplay cues. In Unreal, it's a specific type of blueprint that is especially useful for carrying logic for aesthetics, so sound, VFX, for example. You can execute or add a gameplay cue from any blueprint, and it's soft referenced, meaning that it will only load when needed, and it will get garbage collected once it's not needed anymore. So in this example here, you see a very simple gameplay cue that when it's executed, it's going to call a function that plays our Niagara system for VFX, as well as spawning an AK component with an associated AK event for the audio. So if both are being spawned at the same time in the same place, they are always starting in sync, which is a big win right there. And you're also able to set up some logic on a parent, inherit it on its children, and if you need to change anything on the parent, it propagates to the children. So it's pretty handy because you don't have to rescript a lot of assets. So in this other example here, you have a child of a more complex gameplay cue, which is inheriting from its parents the ability to attach our effects to a component or a limb, to offset its spawn location, to play our VFX via Niagara, and to start and stop our AK events, as well as set a switch if needed. We use those to support, for example, an enemy's attack from start to finish. So we're going to watch a short video here of a fight with one of our epic creatures. For now, try to focus on the sounds of the attacks the enemy does, and see if you notice any particular patterns. Just to state the obvious, the music was muted so you could pay attention to the sound effects. So hopefully you got any patterns from the attacks. Let's break this down. So for all of the abilities in the game, like for example those stomps, grabs, and the exploding spheres that you just saw, they are driven actually by another type of blueprint in Unreal called a gameplay ability, or a GA. That contains all of the logic for the ability itself, and it also references all of the animation montages, some gameplay cues, some data tables, data assets, and so on. For us, we had mainly 2 ways to call a sound and a VFX for an ability, either via tags in an animation, which is the top route here in this flowchart, or by calling the sound straight into a blueprint actor that is spawned by this ability. So first of all, we're going to check out the tags via an animation route. So sometimes the same ability has multiple animations. So take for that grab, for example. The epic can try to reach you like on its legs, on its chest, on its head. All of those are different animations. Also, all of the attacks have an anticipation phase where the enemy is preparing an attack, an execution phase where the attack is actually happening, and a recovery phase where the enemy is going back to their idle state. So to ensure we had a sufficiently simple way to support all of those moments and the implementation and iteration would be easy, we went with a mapping system that we called the effects map. So what this does is we would tag the animation's anticipation, execution, and recovery phases with their appropriate tags, and these will look at the gameplay queue or at the gameplay ability for what gameplay queue to spawn. So for example, a grab is a gameplay ability. Inside that blueprint, we're saying, play this gameplay cue for the sound of the anticipation, another one that plays the sound and the VFX for the execution, and another one maybe just the VFX of the recovery. And all of the animations that are used by this same gameplay ability are referencing the same thing. We also hooked a VO map to this same system so that we could call VO assets with the same tags. So for example, in our grab example, we can play an inhale on top of the anticipation sound effect and an effort VO for the execution. So each of those tags was able to trigger the sound effect, the VO, and the VFX. If we move them, we move all of those three things, they're always starting in sync. That's a pretty big win for us. So let's see that in action. All right, so that was one of our methods, right? But sometimes we couldn't rely on the effects map because an animation is not fully represented by the animations. For example, this ability that spawns an ensnaring blast and explodes, that is mostly sound, VFX, and gameplay logic. So there's no animation associated with that. But it is spawning a new blueprint actor that is carrying all of the logic. So we would hook our sounds directly into that. For example, when the ensnaring blast is idling, when it's auto-diffuses, and when it explodes. This method was especially useful for certain state changes. So for example, you can inject fire or ice into that ensnaring blast, and then it's going to go unstable and explode. We wanted the sound, of course, to reflect both the instability and the explosion differently, depending on whether you injected fire or ice. So we were able to set our Wwise switches directly into the blueprint logic, which was very straightforward. So let's hear how this sounds in the game. Well, moving ahead with our case study. So after an ability happens, regardless if it was executed by the enemy or the player or whomever, it usually resulted in damage. So we'll break down how that flow happens. We'll first look at the attack itself, then what happens when we hit something, the difference between hitting a character or an object, and how the system performs the destruction of this object. So we have a very powerful crafting system in the game where you can forge and reforge your weapon with a variety of materials ranging from common to legendary. So you can also level up those weapons. So that means that a level 5 weapon, which is the maximum, that uses only common materials is going to be weaker than a level 1 weapon that uses legendary materials. So notice in the video there that when I replace the common materials with a legendary one, the weapon power parameter goes up by a lot. So our solution to represent those two ways of progressing was to play 2 layers for each weapon swing. A whoosh layer that indicates the level growth, and a zing layer to indicate better materials, or what we call the grade of the weapon. But of course, you can mix and match a variety of different materials, so you can say, oh, this is a legendary sword. It can be made of anything. So there's no clear-cut way to determine that. So instead, we use the weapon power stat to drive this parameter in Wwise, which then feeds this switch. So let's see that in action. In the first video, you see a level 1 sword and shield made entirely with common materials. Now, a level 3 sword and shield made with medium tier materials. And a level 5 weapon made with only legendary materials. And of course, if you decide to bring your common material weapon to level 5, you get the respective combination. So here's our Wwise structure. Inside this release blend container, which is the sound for the weapon swing, we have release level, low, and release weapon grade. So for each one of the 3 weapons in the game, we have one event for low level, levels 1 and 2, another event for medium level, 3 and 4, and another event for level 5, which is the highest. All of those have the weapon grade sweetener embedded into them. And it's driven by the weapon power parameter, like I mentioned earlier. As a cherry on top of it, we also made maxed grade sounds in case you bring your weapon up to level 5 and it's not the top material. You still hear a little bit of an extra power in the sound. So that's what you saw on the last video there. And to ensure all of that doesn't eat up memory, it was very important to set switch container loading to only load media when referenced. So this loads assets on demand. So we could have a big switch structure in Wwise without worrying too much about our memory imprint. It was hugely important just for our progression systems to perform well. Now, when we hit something, we want to represent what object was used to hit. And we had 3 weapons, 10 minions, 10 epics, and the word is your weapon. You can grab a rock and throw it at the enemy, you can grab a tree, you can grab a crate, you can grab a lot of things. And all of those are ways to deal damage. So there's no way we would be able to make one sound for each, or a variety of variations for each one of those particular situations. But we still wanted to give some sense of variety and specificity when you hit something. So we used what we call the damage types. It's a group of sounds for when you slash something, when you smash it, when you pierce it, or when you use your bare hands. So regardless if we're hitting an object or a character, we're playing the same blend container. It's blending the base layer for this damage type, a gore layer if we're hitting a character, or nothing if we're hitting an object. The objects are dealt with another system that we'll go further into detail in a minute. There's a damage layer that is more abstract, and the sound changes if the damage is considered heavy. And finally, if the damage was dealt by an epic creature, we added a boom layer to convey its size. In the next video, you're going to hear the damage types buzz soloed with some gentle music so that you can hear the individual blend for each damage type while attacking characters and objects. And then we're going to hear them in context, in the context of the game. Of course, when you're hitting objects, you don't want to hear a gore layer, right? Instead, you hear an environmental damage sound that is fetched according to the object's most prevalent physical materials. So, for example, if you hit a small rock, or a metal object of a medium size, or a big wooden thing like a cart, for example. And this is, of course, layered with the damage types that we just heard. And if you hit an object enough times, you destroy it, of course, but we'll dive into that with greater detail in the next section. First, I just wanted to do a quick recap of what we saw so far. So gameplay cues were very important for us to keep sound effects, VO, and VFX in sync. With the weapon level and weapon grades, we had a way to convey weapon progression without an excessive amount of assets. And finding a few common denominators for all of the ways to deal damage in the game, simplify the damage flow while keeping it interesting. Okay, let's move on to breaking stuff. So let's talk a little bit about destruction, thermodynamics, and multi-positioning. So in our game, you don't just destroy things by hacking and slashing at them. We have an active thermodynamics system, meaning that the air around you, as well as any objects and characters, have their own temperature. Things will break down if you hit them, of course, but they'll also burn down at a high enough temperature, and they will become brittle if it's too cold, and then they'll be easier to break. So let's see that on a video. Watch out not only for what the attacks do to the objects, but as well how things will break down if it's simply too hot for them to handle. Notice now how you still hear wood breaking after the ability is done. So you might have noticed that there's a lot of stuff breaking all the time. And that could, and it did for a while, make the soundscape very busy and very chaotic. So how did we tame all of that? We called our solutions the AK bubbles, or it's a multi-position bubble system that is implemented by gameplay cues, and it can be referenced by any blueprint. So in this image, imagine that each one of those tiny bubbles is one AK component playing one destruction event. So imagine this is tons of vases breaking more or less at the same time. It would be very costly for CPU and memory if we did that. So instead, we post a request to the bubble manager. The request tells the manager which audio event to play, its position, and its parameters. Then it pulls those requests and is responsible for playing them. The first time an event is requested leads the manager to spawn an AK component in the world with a sphere around it. So in our abstraction, each of those big bubbles here. Now, within a given time frame, if any new similar requests come in, targeting a position within that bubble, we will activate multi-positioning on the component and include it in the bubble. It will also activate a switch for playing a group sound instead of a single destruction sound. So let's hear how this sounded before and after this stack. Notice how loud it sounded when we destroyed multiple crates. So before we were stacking all of the destruction sounds and playing them, they were building up, right? So let's break down how this happens, pun intended. Going back to that destruction slide, if the object is destroyed, we play a destruction sound effect, of course, but how many objects are destroyed within our AK Bubbles time window? If, say, it's just one big wooden table, we fetch the radius of this object, and we know that it's a large object. And from the physical materials, we realize that it's mostly made of wood, so we play a single large wood destruction sound. But if it's the large table and all of the chairs around it, and maybe there's a bookshelf nearby, and all of those get destroyed more or less at the same time, we get an asset that is longer, wider, and it gives it's heavily layered to give an impression of a group. Which sounds better than if we played several single large destruction sounds at the same time. Much messier. So notice that also this systemic approach of fetching the radius of the object and getting the physical materials to determine what sound to play, it's much quicker than assigning a particular destruction sound to every single object you have in the game, which is something that we've seen being done in AAA companies, but because they have enough people to do that, but we couldn't afford that. We were only 4 people. So let's hear this in action. When you destroy multiple breakables at once, these spin cubes are all of the emitters that are being bundled into one AK event. We didn't use it just for destruction, though. These are other examples of the AK bubbles in the game. So all of these ice pillars in the image, they have their own cracks and creaks, but with the AK bubble stack, we're only playing 2 events for all of them. We also have these pipes that leak raw magic into the world, and the AK bubbles here are also grouping them into fewer events, but you see more of them because the radius of the AK bubble is dependent on the attenuation range of the sound. So these sounds can only be heard from up close, so our AK bubble is smaller. So you notice that instead of having one system for destruction, another system for gameplay ingredients, and another system for environmental objects, like you might have had on a AAA company, we use AK bubbles for all of them because the solution is the same for all of them. These are all sounds that would pile up and make your mix sound muddy and messy and take up memory and take up CPU. So you group them, you make them self-destroy when you leave their attenuation range, and you have none of these problems with one single solution. And talking about ice pillars, let's talk about thermodynamics. So as I said, each character and object has their own temperature, which can be changed by fire and ice magic, like so. This affects other things in the game, like the loot you get from certain rocks is different if you smolder them. So the short and sweet of this thermodynamic system is this. We have these buckets in a map, these black volumes you see in the image. Within each of those, they are subdivided into smaller cubic cells that represent a volume of air with their distinct temperature. The blue lines going from Bryn, our character, to the center there, they are showing the interactor's position going to the center of the bucket they are assigned to. Each of those has their specific temperature and associated thermal properties, so mass, material type, etc. And the green numbers you see there are the temperature, the current temperature on her body, on her interactors. The red cubes you see on the left there, they are representing the temperature of a cell if it's above a certain temperature threshold. They're going to feed their position and an intensity RTPC in Wwise. So positions are used for multi-positioning emitters within one AK event, and more cubes means a higher intensity. Like this. I soloed the simulation sound effect so that you can focus on that. So notice how the RTPC at the top is increasing as we get more fire. Now when the ice comes in, we get another AK component. And they start shifting their RTPCs. And now it's cold enough that you only hear the ice. Of course, this tech didn't come without challenges, so in the next video, listen out for a very loud, fiery sound. So I guess you noticed that massive peak right there. I'm talking massive peak. And this is just the thermodynamics simulation sound effect soloed. So what was our problem? We were using the wrong multi-position type for this feature. We were using multi-sources, which adds to the voice volume the more positions you have sending emitters into Wwise. For us, it was much better to use multi-directions, which doesn't affect the overall volume. But we still needed to make it sound more intense when there's more fire, of course. So we feed the intensity parameter, like I said before, with the amount of emitters, and we switch what asset plays for each intensity level. So, to recap this section, AK bubbles and multi-positioning made a huge difference in our soundscape. Our mix was much less busy. Our game became more optimized thanks to fewer AK components being spawned at any given time, and therefore, sound designers and programmers became friends forever. Now, as much as the AK bubbles and multi-positioning helped a lot with providing a cleaner soundscape, the mixing phase was still a big challenge because it's a sandbox game. You have a huge amount of breakables. You can use the word as your weapon, like I said before. So there was going to be chaos at any moment, several times during a play session. So how did we tackle that? First off, we had very clear loudness guidelines per asset type. So we can say that the mixing began in the DAW, even before we brought anything into Wwise. Quoting Aldo Sampaio, our audio director, setting clear guidelines for asset types is key because even if you are wrong about a particular asset type, you're consistently wrong, and it's easier to make changes in the final mix. Now jump to the mixing stage at the end of the production. We adopted a macro/micro approach. Macro mixing, meaning using HDR, to adjust the levels based on the importance of each audio category, while micro mixing uses side chaining to dynamically control the amplitude and an audio signal basis. So in terms of macro or HDR, let's take this very short video, for example. So if we zoom in on the voice monitor, you can see that the HDR window here in blue, and notice that when the fist impact comes in, that drives the HDR window up, which automatically lowers the volume of everything else in the mix by as many decibels as this sound is louder than the threshold, in this case, at this frame, 9.4 decibels. So we adopted this approach to prioritize each category of sound, which already helps a lot in hearing only what you actually want to hear. Now, before we move on to the micro side of mixing, I just wanted to give a very, very quick primer on audio compression for those who are maybe starting out or are more focused on something other than sound design and mixing. So we're not talking about data compression here, but the process of downwards compressing the amplitude of an audio signal. So in this graph, the first image you see there is the dry signal or the original sound. The threshold line in blue there is the volume at which our compressor is going to start acting. So anything louder than this will be compressed down. The compressor itself, the second part there, takes a little bit of time to start compressing the signal. So that's the attack time in red. Then it keeps it quieter, the orange section. And then it takes a little bit of time to return the volume back to its original amplitude, which is the release time there in yellow. So on the third segment, you see a graphical representation of this audio signal being processed by the compressor. You see that now on the orange part, it's quieter than it was originally. One of the main cases to use compression is when you want to even out a sound. So perhaps it's originally too loud, it has too loud of an impact at the start and a very quiet portion at the end. So if you compress down the impact, you have more space or headroom to bring up the quietest parts, and then it becomes more interesting. So let's hear this effect, a bit exaggerated here for clarity. So first you hear the original sound twice, then you hear it twice after the compression is applied. Hopefully you notice that in the compressed sound, you hear more of the crunchy tail. So sidechaining is when you use another sound to drive the compressor. So in the original sound here at the top, this has the compressor, but it's not that is going above the threshold and triggering the compressor. Instead, another sound, the impacts on the second track, they are driving the compressor and telling it when to push down the volume. Let's hear it. So it's effectively giving up space for the impacts to be heard. Okay, but that's linear. How a game is dynamic. We don't know what's going to come in at any given time. So how did we do that in Wwise dynamically? Brace yourselves because this is going to get really nerdy, okay? So our audio director came up with a very clever way to do multi-band sidechain compression in real time. Remember that this is before Audiokinetic came up with their multi-band compression in Wwise 2025. So we have a whole auxiliary send called sidechain, which has the volume set at -200, so it's inaudible. Then we have children for all the major sound categories, so weapons, for example. Notice that that has 3 children, full, high, and low. Full sends to both high and low, and that sets up our multiband compression. So the low has only the low frequencies, and high has all the other frequencies. And all of them have a Wwise meter in the effects chain, measuring the RMS output and providing an RTPC that we have used to control other buses. So in a game with colossal creatures like ours, it's very important to keep the low end in check. So in the low bus, as you might expect, it filters out the high end and only sends the signal from 250 hertz and below to the Wwise meter, which in turn has its own RTPC. This low Wwise meter RTPC then controls the gain of a low shelf equalizer wherever we need, in this case, the music bus. And that's happening in real time. So if a low-end signal comes from the sound effects, that reduces only the low-end gain of the music, and it keeps all the other frequencies intact, so that the music can still sound natural and punchy while giving room to low-end sound effects. Notice that in this screenshot, we're getting RTPCs from 4 places: the magic powers, the epics sound effects, any critical UI sound effects, and the weapons. Let's hear that in action. You can see the loudness meter here, and notice that it's going to dip. When the music comes in, the meter is going to dip when the effects come in. Sorry for cutting it short. We're running out of time. So since we're talking a little bit about music, our composer was Austin Wintory, and his music has a wide dynamic range, so the difference between the loud parts and the quiet parts. And it was very important to keep this breathability in the music. So instead of using your run-of-the-mill downwards compression, which is the one I just explained before, That reduces the peaks and pumps the track, makes it like pump. We went with an upwards compression approach. So we first get the Wise meter output from the music bus, and after that, we feed it into a compressor that comes right after it. And we use that to bring up the output gain when the music is quieter, and then we slightly move the threshold down and the ratio up when the music is much louder. And only then we're downwards compressing it, and even then by very gently, just a few decibels. Now, moving on from compression and HDR and into our last section. I'd like to approach the mixing snapshots. So, for example, when you move out from gameplay and into a cinematic or a menu. We noticed in previous projects that setting buzz volume via events could be very bug prone. Any event can set or reset a buzz volume. It can easily fly under the radar in the profiler. You can't visualize this action in the voice monitor. And depending on the absolute and relative setting at the end there, you can have these trigger multiple times and stack. And after a while, you don't hear any music, and you don't know what's happening. So we abandoned that in favor of using a silence event approach. So what's that about? An audio event playing a looping silence is fired when we enter a menu or when we fade to black, enter a cinematic, and so on. It's properly named after the snapshot in question, and it has a unique color to be easily recognizable in the profiler. And this event is routed to a mute bus. In that bus's auto-ducking settings, we adjust the voice volume and the fade in and out time for each of the buses we want to affect. So we treat this window as the mix snapshot itself. As soon as we exit, we call the exit event, the silence stops playing and the auto-ducking fades out. So some advantages of using this method instead of adjusting buzz volume via event. The debugging is simpler because you can see it in the voice monitor. So it's more of a visual handling of the mixing snapshots. You can stack different snapshots, but the same event will not stack, even if it's called multiple times. So we don't have overriding mix events. And you solve the problem of sounds disappearing over time, for example, which can be very common if you have spamming mix events or a hidden set buzz volume inside an event that is unrelated to mixing. So say, for example, for whatever reason, you decided that it was a good idea to play a sound and lower the Foley buzz by 6 dB on the same event. And maybe someone else decides to grab that event and trigger it on a looping animation. And then it gets called again and again and again, and you don't hear your footsteps anymore. And why are you not hearing your footsteps? So this fixes that problem. This is an example of this method at work. So notice the second bus there lowers in volume when we enter the menu. And this is the bus soloed. So to recap this last section, exporting the audio assets obeying loudness guidelines helps smooth out the mixing process at the end of the project. You can use both HDR and sidechaining to help with dynamic mixing, each playing to their strengths. And for mixing snapshots, you can replace the set bus volume workflow with looping silence events to avoid bugs like losing your sounds over time. And yeah, that's basically what I had to share with you today. I'd like to leave you with some key takeaways from this chat. So first of all, work with other departments to find combined solutions. In our case, joining forces with VFX and animation led us to using gameplay cues for the bulk of our implementations, and having a clear line of communication between the departments allowed us to have less surprises with sync down the road. Less is more. Systems that find a common denominator for several use cases, like the damage types, for example, are more flexible, they save time, they allow you to react quickly if a new feature comes in unexpectedly, and it also communicates designs to players more clearly. And finally, throw away the menu, but make sure to read it first. Sometimes the best solution for your game is not what everyone else is doing. But to know that, you have to know what everyone else is doing, which is why we're all here today, right? So if you're interested in learning more about this game, we have 2 talks about the audio on the GDC Vault. Due to time, I'm just going to abridge this. So you can look them up on the GDC Vault. And on YouTube, we have a talk with our CTO, Louis Tremblay, explaining our physical character controller if you're interested in the physics part of game design. And that's it. Thank you very much for being here.